all these artificial sweeteners, emulsifiers, preservatives, colorants, etc., have negative effects on our gut microbes, which adds to the problem and causes this sort of metabolic imbalance. So
what would you say are the top foods that people tend to think are healthy that can actually lead to weight gain?
There's so many, but I guess top of my list would be OJ. People think of that as a health food, orange juice, and it's not. It's ultra processed. It gives you the same sugar spikes as Coca-Cola, and it's so that's why it's ubiquitous. You go to breakfast, in California, and everyone's giving you, with your coffee, you get a juice. It's like just standard. This is good, healthy, vitamin C. It's got to be good for you, right? People give it to their kids. It's like mandatory, and it's all nonsense. And this stuff is ultra processed. It's been hanging around for a couple of years, usually, in some vat, and flavors added to it. And that's probably number one on my list. I think the second one, I guess people think of, brown breads as healthy.
Here in the US, we would call them like whole wheat bread, right?
Yeah. Whole wheat germ, seeded loaves, it has that healthy look about it. And most of the store-bought ones are really relatively low in fiber and high in sugar. And people think they're eating healthy foods, and they're not. Again, it's a sort of misnomer. And that, when I was researching the book, that was one of the things that sort of really struck me, the vast differences between breads, between the healthiest and the least healthy. And it changed my mind, and that's one of the things I noticed when I was doing my own self-experiments. I think the other good one is, in the UK we'd call porridge or oatmeal. Oats have got a super healthy reputation, particularly in the US, where there was this massive marketing campaign about how it could lower your blood cholesterol and be good for your heart.
Yeah, you always see the red heart healthy logo.
Which is ridiculous because that's from the 1980s, where some flawed research showed it had a minute effect on blood cholesterol, total blood cholesterol, which has virtually no effect on your subsequent health. And it's generally eaten as highly refined carbs that give you a huge sugar peak again. And all these three things, whether it's bread, orange juice, oatmeal, for many people, not everybody, but for many people, as hopefully we'll discuss this personalization, gives them a sugar peak. Many people get a sugar dip, and as well as the bagged effects of these constant sugar spikes, these sugar dips lead people to overeat and makes them feel more hungry, and they will overeat by about 10 to 15% compared to people who don't have those dips. So regardless of calories, and there are plenty of calories in this stuff as well, just the fact that the sort of structure of the food gives you this effect on your body causes people to overeat, causes people to gain weight in ways they wouldn't have thought, because they said, okay, listen, I'm having oatmeal for breakfast, I'm having, wheat germ toast, and I'm having orange juice. This is all healthy, is what I give my kids, and everyone's getting bigger. So I think that'd be the three sort of big examples. There's many more, but we can go on.
Well, that's a great place to start, because I grew up during the era in the US where we were dictated to consume foods in accordance with the food pyramid, right? Which at every 24-hour cycle implored us to consume somewhere between 7 and 11 servings of grains per day. And the food, I'm not familiar with the UK dietary guidelines, but today we have the MyPlate, which still, depending on, you go to the MyPlate website, you plug in some basic anthropometric figures about yourself, and still, depending on calorie needs, makes the recommendation that you consume up to 10 servings of grains a day. And a slice of whole wheat bread would satisfy one of those servings, So theoretically, you could consume 10 slices of whole wheat bread a day and still be copacetic with the dietary guidelines.
Yeah, well, the food manufacturers have really done a brilliant job in sort of combining these rather loose guidelines with pushing their foods as healthy. When you actually break it down and what those foods do and how highly refined they are, which isn't in any of these guidelines, so how refined these foods are, the structure of them, the fact that they've lost most of the outer casing of the plant so that you're only getting the soft, starchy bits that are just super easy to absorb and so go straight into the bloodstream. Really fooling us because they're industrially made foods that tick a box to say at some level someone's in the FDA saying they're healthy, when in fact they're really bad for the vast majority of the population. And because we've become obsessed with calories and it contains grains as tick, low in fat tick, we're having extremely unhealthy food. And these are three good examples of commonly eaten foods that if you went out in the streets and asked average American, is this healthy or not, they'd say, oh yes, that's healthy. And all the modern science now says it absolutely isn't, except in moderation. I think the whole point is that you have these every now and again, it's fine, but not as your core diet, which many people do.
And part of the reason why they're so potentially harmful is not necessarily that they are in and of themselves implicitly toxic or obesogenic, right, fattening, but it's that they can change behavior in ways that are not always obvious, right? They can actually perpetuate hunger.
Yeah, I think this is the new science that's coming out really about all these types of foods, which are not, they're industrially made, refined products, ultra-processed foods, which we've only recently found out in the last 3 years have these extra effects on our bodies that aren't just due to the calories or the fats or the sugars. So it's something about the structure, the way they're put together, that affects our bodies in two sort of main areas. One, this metabolic effect that we only found really from the studies with the company that I co-founded, Zoe, using these glucose monitors in thousands of people to see that 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 people have these big sugar dips after having these foods, and that ends up them overeating. And other studies have shown in ultra-processed food that when you can put people on a 2-week diet of either ultra-processed food or home cooked foods, there was a big study out of Bethesda and NIH, Kevin Hall's group, that showed this, that those people will overeat continuously. Although they perceive the food as the same, it's the way it's structured. It gets into your body so fast, you don't have those signals of fullness that switch off the normal mechanisms that you do with real food. And so you've got this whole mechanism of causing overeating just by the structure and nature of the food in ways we don't yet understand. But it's quite scary, the amounts. We're talking, if every day of your life you're eating this food and you're adding 300 calories without knowing it, it's not surprising when you look around, that you've got nearly 50% of Americans obese, because it's this silent sort of epidemic that's going on whilst many of them think they're eating healthily. And the other mechanism, of course, is the gut microbes, which we might get into, which many of the components of these kind of foods are, it's the extra chemicals they use to, fake the normal food. They have to have all these other chemicals in there to give it the same mouthfeel, the same texture, to glue it together, to make it look appetizing, make it smell appetizing. And all these artificial sweeteners, emulsifiers, preservatives, colorants, etc., have negative effects on our gut microbes, which adds to the problem and causes this sort of metabolic imbalance. So this is all very new, and I'm sure the vast majority of people don't know that when they're going into a store and buying a product that says healthy for you, contains vitamin C, tick, contains your whole grains, tick, low in calories, tick. Low in fats, tick. Marvelous. Must be great for you. Well, but they should all have health warnings.
Health warnings.
Yeah, ultra processed food should have, like cigarettes, a clear health warning saying, warning, this product is likely to make you overeat by 10 to 15%.
Oh my gosh.
Which is what the science is now showing and what the food industry hasn't wanted us to know for the last 40 years.
So the quality of the food really, in no small way, influences the quantity of food that you subsequently eat.
Exactly. So it's all about quality of the food. And by our obsession with calories and macronutrients, we've totally obscured this whole debate about food quality and food structure and having food in its original whole form, which we evolved to eat normally. And so by eating these artificially created edible substances, which we're calling food, we've fallen into this trap of pretending we know so much about food that we can define it by macronutrients and calories, and sprinkling a few fake vitamins into it. We think we've got the perfect mix, and it is unraveling, but very few people know about it.
I've heard it described as nutritionism. It's like, we, with all of our hubris, have decided that we can now, with the tools of the scientific method, break down a food to its like constituent nutrients and then ultimately recreate that food. But there's something lost, I feel like.
Well, we've done that in a way that's hugely reductionist. So most of us, think of an orange as what's in an orange? Oh, vitamin C, and a bit of sugar.
Yeah.
What's in a carrot? Vitamin A.
Yeah.
And so we think of what's in grapes, or resveratrol or something. So we forget that in garlic alone, there's over 1,000 different chemicals. It's not just allicin in there, and we have no clue how these interact together. We've just taken the one that is good for advertising or promotion, and can be sold also as a supplement, and extracted that, and that's how we define those foods. But the recent science has shown there's over 30,000 different chemicals in the food we eat. And it's impossible for us to comprehend that. You can't go in and say, which, list of ingredients on the back of a carrot, and you see all these, you could memorize the 800 different chemicals. You're not going to do it. And as you said, it's human hubris that we think, okay, we can totally recreate that. And now we're understanding the complexity of food and the complexity of evolution and how we've been programmed to use food and metabolize it, and the whole complexity of our gut microbes, who are basically chemical factories producing all these other products that get into our bloodstream and have all these amazing myriad of metabolic processes. So it's vastly more complicated than we've been led to believe. And we've been dumbing it down for the last 50 years to try and sort of get a few health messages across, which we believe were true. Fat is bad, or, saturated fat is this, or, it's been so reductionist that the food industry has been able to easily get around that and add even more processing to this stuff to get it further and further away from real food. And so we're ingesting many more chemicals that we've never known in nature. And I think most people don't realize, that all the chemicals you get if you look at the back of a pack, that they're just, most of them come from the petrol industry. Most of the artificial sweeteners came from paraffin and various other things you wouldn't ever put in your mouth normally, and your gut microbes have never, in their millions of years of evolution, ever come across them.
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak to artificial sweeteners, but I know that some of these industrially refined, bleached, and deodorized seed oils that now saturate the standard American food supply and probably, overseas as well, started out as engine lubricants,
Yes.
And then you take engine lubricants or just flat out waste products that were thrown away, which is the case for grapeseed oil, which was a byproduct which was found in grape seeds, which were thrown away during the winemaking process until one industrious manufacturer realized you can press them for oil, run that oil through a bunch of steps, and then you end up with something that's dirt cheap and could be used in any number of ultra-processed food products.
And many of these chemicals, as you said, are reused as deodorants or very hairspray or fuel retardants or things like this. And so, they're multi-use chemicals, and the food industry has never had to show that they're safe. They've been all classified as generally regarded as safe because there's no proof of harm. And this was due to lobbying by the food industry to pass, this ridiculous number of additives that can be stuck into our food with no real testing. And I mean, there should have been testing, but until 10 years ago, there was no way of probably testing it in our gut microbes, which are a crucial organ in our bodies, and we never tested food in that way at all. And yet, it's to my mind, the gut microbiome, this organ in our body, a virtual organ, is as important as our heart or our liver.
Yeah, can you talk about that a little bit? So the gut microbiome. I mean, I think some of my listeners are probably familiar with that, but for people who are tuning in, that's a novel concept to them, this idea that we live in symbiosis with bacteria. What does that actually mean? Unpack that if you can.
Well, the word itself just means the community of all the microorganisms that live in our body. And generally we talk about the 99% that live in the lower part of our intestine, our gut, which is this 9-meter long organ. But right at the bottom is where most of them are. And there are trillions, perhaps 100 trillion of these guys that are down there, as many as there are cells in our body. And they're a combination of bacteria. There are viruses that eat those bacteria. There are fungi in there. There are yeasts in there. There are parasites in there. And essentially they all work all together like an organ, producing chemicals. They're like mini pharmacies.
Wow.
So they're converting the food that we eat into all these chemicals I talked about, the 30,000 chemicals, into hundreds of thousands of other chemicals, breaking them down, making them all working together, and then pumping them out into our body. And the number one role is on our immune system. So it's not by chance that 70% of all the immune cells in our body are right next to these gut microbes in our intestine. So they're talking to them all the time with these chemical signals. And if they're ill, then our immune system's ill. And so that's a big way that's probably why we've got all this food allergy in the last 20 years, where we've got all these problems with intolerance and autoimmune diseases. But they also fight infection, and important for cancer protection and surveillance. Really crucial for us is our immune system. But that's just one bit of what these microbes do. They also send signals to the brain. Important, they provide a lot of the signal hormones like serotonin, chemicals that get made that can influence your mood, and many others, and change your appetite levels. They obviously metabolize food as well, and have myriad other actions across our body that we're still beginning to unravel, and we know we couldn't live without them. So we evolved from them. So we're sort of descended from microbes, but very early on, there was a partnership between sort of mammals and these microbes to coexist in symbiosis. So, we only have a handful of gut chemicals that we use to break down food. We rely on the tens of thousands of the others for these really specialized guys in our gut to do the rest. And they produce a lot of the vitamins for our body. All the B vitamins are made from our gut microbes as well. So, it's really important that people do understand this new organ in our body, I call it a virtual organ. It weighs about 3 or 4 pounds, about the same as our brain.
Wow.
If you stick them all together. And, although we lose half of them every time we go to the toilet, they are an enormous part of us. And I think what I like to do in explaining food in this new context is it's really very different. You have a very different approach to food if you realize that, you're not just feeding a furnace, you're feeding this whole community of pharmacies that needs the right materials to make all the great chemicals to keep you healthy and fit. And I think that's a really important concept. And I think if we get that across, people will think about food very differently to the way they are at the moment, where it's all about calories and macros and, worried about this and that. When in fact, it's trying to keep that whole community happy and really doing the best for the whole group, because they work for each other and they will fill in gaps if they can. But we've lost half of our gut microbes in the last 100 years or less.
What's led to that?
Probably just the Western lifestyle, a number of factors. Antibiotics. The average American has had about 20 courses of antibiotics in the first 18 years of life.
Wow.
Vastly overused. And in many people, they wipe out huge tracts of microbes that we never get back. General sterile living. So living in cities away from fields and trees and gardens and dirt and animals. And then, of course, our junk food and all the additives with having the lack of fiber compared to our ancestors, and the lack of diversity, and all these chemicals like the sweeteners, the emulsifiers that can actually do harm to our gut microbes. So it's a combination of all of these things together. And it means that we don't have the same armory, if you like, of people who are living in Africa or third world countries, where they still have the old lifestyle and they have what evolution gave them to thrive and have a really powerful, strong immune system.
So we're essentially poisoning them with all of these processed food, ultra processed food additives, and we're not giving, and we're concurrently starving them of what they need to thrive. We're not consuming adequate fiber and other, I guess, like fuel substrates for these microorganisms.
That's right. It's a double whammy, and it reminds me when I read my first book on nutrition, but the diet myth. I was doing lots of self-experiments, and one of them, I just finished the French cheese diet, which was just to eat French cheese only with a bit of red wine for 3 whole days.
Is that an actual diet, or did you?
No, I invented it.
You invented it.
But,
what was the point of that?
Well, after day 1, I was going to write a book on it. And, after day 2, I wasn't so sure. And day 3, I definitely said, this isn't a diet that you can sustain.
Well, the French, they live a long time, right? Isn't that like the French?
Yeah, but
gardens?
they don't just eat French cheese. That's I was trying to sort of prove a point and see what it would be like, and could I change my gut microbes? I said, recommend it for 24 hours, but no more than that. And these were raw milk, highly with lots of microbes in it, so probiotic cheeses, very smelly ones. But I was going to do another experiment, which was to do the only eating at McDonald's for a couple of weeks, sort of supersize me. And but I wasn't really looking forward to that, because I had to have all my meals there, and I'd seen the Merton Spurlock show where he got very sick doing it for 6 weeks. But I was going to look at my microbes. So I said, I'll do a shorter time. And it turned out that another volunteer came up who was a student who really loved McDonald's and was keen for me to pay for him to do this. And he also happened to be my son. So he ticked all the boxes. And so Tom did this. He was really keen. So this is going to be easy. I love McDonald's. But after 4 days, he rang me up and said, I'm really not feeling well, Dad. It's starting to affect my brain, and hard to study and this sort of stuff.
Wow.
And of course, as a concerned father, he said, can I stop? And as a concerned father, I obviously said, no way, you're going to continue. We're going to publish this in the newspapers. So he did do it till the end. But the sort of sad bit of the story is he'd lost, I think 35 to 40% of his gut diversity in that 10-day period where he'd only been eating junk food.
Wow.
And even now, years later, he hasn't got back to where he was, which sort of is a real, okay, it's only one person, but just the concept that you can actually kill off some of your microbes with this combination of all the nasty chemicals in junk food and the total lack of fiber.
It probably also, your experiment also, I think, like speaks to the importance of just dietary diversity in general, right?
Correct.
Like how important it is to just eat a diverse, varied diet.
Absolutely. And all the research comes back. It doesn't matter what sort of diet you're looking at, the healthy ones have diversity in them. This sort of mono eating only one thing really is not what our microbes do. And we did a big project about 5 years ago where we combined a sample that I set up with the British Gut Project with the American Gut Project. And we had, I think it was over 11,000 people, and looked at their habits and who had the healthiest gut microbes. And the sweet spot for that was people who were eating 30 plants a week. Different plants, not the same plant. So it's not 30 types, not 30 kale salads. It's the nuts, the seeds, the herbs, the spices. It's that variety. And the interesting thing is we divided it into meat eaters, pescatarians, vegans. It didn't matter. All that mattered is you were getting that diversity on your plate to get that maximal gut health. And I think that's a really important message that has gone across. And, and there have been lots of studies since then, but all the diets that are healthy long term have to have that diversity of foods in there to satisfy all those gut microbes. And it seems to be mainly plants. You get some extra diversity with meat and fats and things, but it seems to be mainly the plants that are driving it.
And so should the target then be 30 different plants a week?
That's our current idea. I think we've got some bigger data sets now with the Zoe program. We've got like 50,000 people we're looking at. So we're going to get a more precise answer, but in general, that seems to be the sort of a nice round figure that people can aim at anyway. And it does, since I've been writing my books, people have been following that and say it is actually easier than it sounds, particularly if you like eating nuts and seeds. Each one of them is a different species. And even the difference between, say, a purple carrot or an orange carrot, they have different chemicals in them, which means that different microbes will feed off them. And so the concept of what a different plant is, it can be within the same family, but just subtle variations and things like this will keep many more species alive in your gut. So it's a different way of thinking about food, and it's quite a fun way as well. So I think what I like about it is, the idea that I have and the idea we've instilled into the Zoe program is getting people to eat more foods, find something interesting new you haven't eaten, get people to, out of these very narrow mindsets of this is my favorite salad. I go to this particular salad bar and this is what I have every single day.
Yes.
This is my go-to smoothie. I only have this one, right? And this is all I have and I feel great. And this is just not, the right attitude should be to try new things, exciting. And of course it's more fun, more interesting for your palate to test yourself. And we change with age as well as our, I used to hate beets.
Now you love it?
I love them. But I absolutely hated them until I was about 40 years old.
Interesting.
So, challenge yourself to retry some of these things you hated. I think that's the other real idea that goes through, particularly if it's doing some good,
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think people should always be willing to challenge their, whatever narrative they hold true about their preferences and whatnot, because you're a different person day to day. And you're certainly a different person today than you were 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago even.
Yeah.
And so always being willing to challenge yourself, try new things. There are things today that I enjoy that I wouldn't have liked 10 years ago, but your palate changes. So I love this. So we've established that dietary fiber, among other things, really important for the gut microbiome, but like, how does that actually play out in terms of like a health benefit? Like what are the benefits of increasing one's fiber intake?
Well, you get more microbes producing more healthy chemicals, and all the epidemiology evidence, and I studied for a long time as an epidemiologist, are that people who have high fiber diets put on less weight, regardless of the total calories. They put on less weight over time. They have less heart disease. They have less cancer. They have less diabetes, less chronic disease. So that's a very clear association that goes around the world. That's very clear to see. Now, in the past, we didn't really understand why. We just said, well, fiber, we thought it just flushed out toxins. It was this rather sort of narrow-minded view of the gut as just this tube, that was there to get rid of those poisons. We now know that's nonsense. And there isn't really a concept now that's scientific about toxins. It's about really properly feeding, giving fertilizer to this amazing community that's then pumping out these really healthy chemicals, making you feel good, improving your mood, energy, and allowing you better control of your energy balance so that you can maintain the correct weight and the right appropriate signals for your appetite, etc. So it also means that the food, as you're eating it, is taking longer to get down the gut. And so it's not being, like, as you said, if you follow the food plate, you'd be eating all these grains and refined grains that might get straight into your blood system, which causes sugar peaks. And you haven't got time to feel hungry. And so you're eating more, you're eating faster, and it doesn't get the right signals. If it's got fiber with it, it spends longer in the gut, and therefore that's the one way we were programmed to eat naturally. And it's absorbed slower, you get the fullness signals quicker, so you don't overeat. And so these are all part of these signals. We still don't understand that much about fiber. There's been hardly anyone really studying it. It's incredibly complicated. And because we just assumed it was just this flushing device, like a sense of plumbing.
Yeah.
So we got it completely wrong. And that's why a lot of companies started developing these artificial fibers to add to processed foods.
Especially like low sugar foods, like keto foods, foods that are marketed as being particularly healthy.
Yeah. So if you look at the back of the pack and you say high in fiber, they might have just added something called inulin, for example, which comes from chicory roots. And it's highly synthetic. It's a good fiber in its natural form, but in a powder, in all the trials, you give it to people and it actually can reduce your gut diversity because it's so specific to only feed one particular family of microbes. They sort of take over and the other guys don't get a look in. So again, it's us trying to be too clever, thinking we've got the answer. It turns out when you actually do the clinical trials, it doesn't work nearly as well as giving people real food, Mediterranean-style diets, high in fiber, high in plants, for reasons we still don't understand, but it's just embracing that complexity.
Yeah.
Understanding we don't know about all these ingredients of these plants yet, but we do know they're good. And let's not leap forward before we actually understand what we're doing, or if we do the proper studies first to say it works or it doesn't work.
Yeah, makes total sense.
There isn't that shortcut. Everyone's looking for the shortcut, the shot, the magic bullet, that can sort it all out. And really, it's very naive to think there is one.
Always, yeah, I completely agree. What do you think about psyllium husk? Psyllium husk is something that I feel like is gaining in popularity, and for reasons other than I think its traditional use. A lot of people kind of think of psyllium husk as being the thing that they find in their grandparents' cabinets, to help them go to the bathroom more regularly. But I think that there's a lot of people are now starting to use it for health benefits that are broader than just regularity.
Well, again, there's nothing wrong with psyllium husks as long as it's part of a wide, diverse diet. But if people say have a junk food diet and they just have their glass of psyllium husks every day, it's not going to solve the problem. You end up with this, again, far too focused an idea that you can solve everything with this one magic bullet. Because there are so many other forms of fiber that have similar similar effects on the bowel that are better. There's nothing wrong with it, I don't think. Although I'm concerned that sometimes it's, they say Psyllium Husks on the label because it has a sort of healthy brand, but it's actually ultra refined, or it's not like you would make at home.
Yeah.
And I don't think we understand enough about it.
Well, some brands, they load it with maltodextrin to make it easier to stir up, which is essentially just pure glucose.
Yes. Again, it's that quick fix. Beware of the quick fix that's going to sort it out. Just get, eat some similar type vegetables or plants instead.
Yeah.
And you're getting all the other stuff that we still don't know about.
I'm totally on board. I'm on team, just so everybody knows, I've got one foot firmly planted, no pun intended, in the world of plants and fiber, and I'm on board. But what about there are a lot of voices now in the online nutrition space that, have adopted these more carnivore style diets, and they would argue, just to play devil's advocate, even to my own biases, that some of the benefits that we see with fiber consumption, it's healthy user bias. It's of course people that eat more plants are going to have better health outcomes because they're just more health conscious than your average meat eater. What do you think about that assertion?
Well, it's always reasonable to question observational epidemiology studies. There's always some healthy select health bias, but all the studies have adjusted as much as possible for all the other social factors, education level, calorie amounts, exercise levels, and all these studies still find major effects of fiber, so that even if it was being overestimated by a bit, even 5 or 10% due to these other factors, it's any serious epidemiologist doesn't believe they're so biased that fiber is not a real factor.
Because even after adjusting for all the potentially confounding variables, they still see a magnitude of effect that's
huge. And they're also, obviously, observational studies are one thing, but there are always biases. You can't adjust for everything. But the fact that in every country and different social scenarios, it's not like there's just one or two studies. But randomized controlled trials also show that people on high fiber Mediterranean diets always do better in terms of all the basic biological parameters. So these are people randomized, so you get rid of that effect. You put them on these diets, these effects. And there've been huge studies like in Spain, for example, where they put people on high nut diets and Mediterranean diets, and within all of these, you're always seeing the effects of the fiber group that are positive. But fiber isn't the only thing, though. I mean, it's not. There've been some, but I think every serious nutritional epidemiologist believes fiber is good for you, and the evidence is there. So there may be people out there who don't agree with these expert opinions, but that I think is as close as we're going to get to the truth, because it's very hard to do a randomized trial for 10 years of forcing people to eat fiber and forcing other people to not. It's just, that's the nature of nutritional research. It is very tough. So at some point you've got to accept these things. But I think nearly every study in the world has shown that a Mediterranean diet outdoes the standard American or Western diet, which is low in fiber. And what part of it is most important is still unclear. So, fiber is definitely one part of it. It's not the only thing, because we've talked about the diversity of the fiber. So the amount of fiber is one thing, but then there's the diversity. Then there's also these other things, is the polyphenols, the phytochemicals in the plants that have a clear effect on health as well. So it's eating the right things. So that's polyphenols are these defense chemicals in plants that protect them against other insects and from disease and from the sun, and give them their bitterness and sometimes their color. And they're high amounts in things like nuts and seeds and olive oil and coffee, for example. And it turns out all of those things are been shown in many trials to be really good for health. And so that's another part of the diet that's really important. And the reason we now know is that polyphenols are used by our gut microbes. We used to think they go directly into our blood and magically act as antioxidants. But now we realize that most of their action is through feeding our gut microbes, which then produce, they feed off them in ways that we can't use ourselves. So it's another way of feeding them. And so the polyphenols are important. That's why eating the rainbow is important. And the third thing is fermented food, of course, which isn't very common in the American diet. Because a lot of the cheese eaten is processed, frozen, or fake cheese.
Oh, it's super fake.
And lost the art of having raw milk cheeses and the sort of French-style European stuff that's running with bacteria, which has been very helpful. So yogurt is the other one, but most of the yogurts sold have artificial sweeteners, artificial fruits, masses of sugar, which probably kill off the microbes anyway. So fermented foods have been shown very clearly and now in randomized trials as well as epidemiology to help the gut and health and heart health. And a recent study showed very clearly from Stanford that just in 8 weeks, you can really reduce your inflammation levels quite dramatically by having at least three portions of fermented food a day. And they compared this with fiber. So they had one fiber arm and they had one fermented food arm. Both did well, but you got even better benefit with the fermented food in terms of the immune system.
Wow.
So I think what I want to is not focusing on just one thing. So it's only about fiber, it's only about this. It's this holistic approach to food, realizing that all of these things are good because of the common endpoint, which is how does it affect our gut microbes? And that's really important. And so they're the three big elements to a good diet. And once you've got those in, and maybe you cut out, we can get on to things like time-restricted eating and giving a gut a bit of a rest, which is shown to be beneficial. So
is that important?
Yeah. So how you eat is just as important as what you eat. So we've done some studies with Zoe recently showing that snacking, people who snack a lot are associated with poor health as well. And you probably remember that 10, 20 years ago, we were all told to eat small amounts regularly and often, like grazing like cows, right? Rather than like eating like lions. That was the sort of...
they used to say to stoke the metabolic flame, that it would actually help us get leaner and healthier by eating more frequently throughout the day. So you're saying that's a bad idea?
It's rubbish.
Huh.
Yeah.
Wow.
For most people. And I think there might be some people that do okay with it, but in general, all the evidence now is showing that people who eat 2 meals a day, 2 big meals a day, rather than, say, 6 eating events, generally do better metabolically. And they've done at least a dozen studies now of people randomized to skipping breakfast and having a sort of larger lunch. And those people on average do better metabolically and there's marginally lose some weight as well. So everything is pointing all that past advice was wrong, and this snacking culture is also very harmful, rather than not just the extra calories you get, which in the US amounts to about 1/4 of all calories are snacks. But
1/4 of all calories are from we ingest via snacking.
Yes.
Wow.
So that's a pretty simple way to, change what you ingest, is to say, well, I'm not going to snack, which might be very hard for some people. But if you look at the healthy countries, say in the Mediterranean countries, they just don't snack. They have big, substantial meals. They wait long times between food, and you just don't see people eating in their cars or waiting for the train or wherever it is. It's a completely different culture. And we've shown in our studies that particularly snacking late in the evening is really associated with obesity and problems, because you just, as well as getting those extra calories in, you're not resting your gut. So your gut is still working hard. It hasn't got time to repair, and it's just less efficient.
And nobody's snacking on anything good late at night.
It's very unusual to be. Yes, I don't think many people. Oh, I'm going to get some fresh berries or something. No, it tends to be.
Yeah, like
rubbish.
People aren't eating crudité like while they're binge watching their favorite Netflix show. You know, like they're eating junk food.
Yeah,
ice cream, chips, crisps, whatever you want to call them.
Yeah, chocolate.
Yeah, all those things.
Yeah, and so timing is also important. This is one thing we're learning, and as we get more and more data from our studies, is the importance of meal timings, and there will be some personalization in this, but in general, compressing the time you eat is healthy, and the evidence is becoming overwhelming that if you can eat in a smaller time window in the day, say within a 10-hour, eat all your meals within 10 hours, and you have 14 hours to rest your gut and your body, that's a healthier way, and that's how we originally evolved to eat. And I think we've just done a huge study in the UK called the Zoe Health Study, where we got 140,000 volunteers to go on, use our app, and we persuaded them to do this for 3 weeks. And most of them managed to do it, interestingly. And those that did get to the 10-hour window, on average, they improved their mood. They've had more energy, and they reported some weight loss. I mean, there was a bit of difference between people, and there were some people who didn't like doing it, but those that did do it, vast majority showed benefits of it, and it was much easier than they thought it was going to be. So I think this how we eat is going to be a really big future project, I think, to retrain ourselves from eating like the food manufacturers want us to eat, which is 24/7.
Right.
With protein snacks and this bar, you must need this and you've got to have this. All of this is disrupting our bodies in ways that we weren't intended to eat. And so these snacks might be fine if you have them right before or after your other meals, but having these other eating events just sort of, it doesn't allow your body to rest, I think, is the general principle. And I think we're going to see more and more of this build-up of this time-restricted eating becoming absolutely mainstream in health advice.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating to witness as an outsider all of these different these lines of evidence that are now converging. Like we recently had Sachin Panda on the show, who's one of the world's preeminent circadian biologists, and he was speaking from the standpoint of like the hypothalamus and like, the brain, the neuroscience underpinning time-restricted eating and the benefits that they've seen clinically. But you guys are looking at like the microbiome and the effects, and you're coming to the same conclusions.
Yeah, from a different point of view. And his sort of studies are done in 20 people in vast detail with MRI scans and this sort of stuff. We're doing these citizen science projects in hundreds of thousands of people, and seeing it is actually a pragmatic way, outside a lab, where it's not like you're in some tiny lab in San Diego paying people to do this stuff. In real life, you can actually do it quite easily, and it's sustainable. And I think we need to be always looking at these things as, maybe you don't have to do 10 hours. Maybe, 12 hours is fine. And most people could probably cope with that much easier. But there are always some people that can't. There's some people in my colleagues in the company Zoe that we asked them all to do this, and that I think out of 10 people, 2 of them said, I can't do this. I'm a snacker. I have to be eating snacks. So, and they get terribly hungry and anxious if they're not eating. So I think there are differences between people.
Of course.
But then those people just need to learn that it's dangerous to eat unhealthy snacks, and that, that they have to having the good stuff, it's really important.
Yeah, I was going to ask. Like, I mean, I feel like there are different kinds of snacks, but for the most part, most foods that people would typically think of as snack foods are probably like vending machine foods. You know, they're like, again, chips, and
they're usually bright orange and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. Painted or branded with primary colors, and mostly just some slurry of carbs and fat and sugar and salt, you know, like just all the things that like give us that like dopamine hit, that respite in the middle of the day. But like if you could also conversely snack on things like Greek yogurt, unsweetened Greek yogurt, you know.
Well, peanuts are actually a fairly healthy snack. You know, most nuts you can get if there's not too much salt in them. Mixed nuts and seeds, very healthy way to eat. And, you know, and it's not, you can't eat fruits either. Just don't pick the super sugary ones. You know, don't have a mango late at night or anything. But nothing wrong with apples. You know, the good old fashioned snack that was around 50 years ago.
I'm a huge fan of apples. Oh my God, Honeycrisp apples. Do you get Honeycrisp apples?
Yeah,
overseas. Do. They're amazing. My favorite breed of apple by far. I was listening to you on another podcast, and I heard that you recently changed your mind about two things that I wanted to talk about. One was bananas, and the other being salt. Talk to me about
very different topics.
Very different topics, yeah. But let's go into it because I think they're both fascinating. But let's start with bananas. Like, what was your previous attitude about bananas, and then where was that flip?
I was brought up the idea that bananas are the ultimate health food. You always see tennis players reaching for their banana, you know, in the fifth set at Wimbledon. And
by the way, I had a banana this morning, so I hope you're not about to tell me that bananas are killing me as well.
No, nothing wrong with bananas, but we've always focused on them as, you know, a great energy source and have great PR and the source of potassium. But it turns out for me, when I did my personalized Zoe scores and I saw the differences between, I was able to list the fruits, and in the book I list my scores for all the different fruits, that a banana scored pretty low for me because of its available sugars. There's actually a lot of sugar in bananas that people don't always realize. And if you are, like me, sensitive to sugar, it gives me a sugar spike. And so it's quite likely that would lead to me being hungrier later in the day. But for years, you know, I used to cycle to work in the hospital, always had a banana in the bag because it came in its nice own healthy wrapper, you know, and it was the perfect thing to have with my lunch. And it's only when I did my scores and I realized, gosh, this is scoring really pretty low for me. You know, it was about a 3 out of 10, which I thought really low for a fruit. So, whereas pears or apples, you know, are scoring, you know, 50 or 60%. So really much less of a sugar spike for the same energy. And there was nothing magical I learned about the potassium either. You get plenty more potassium from other vegetables and fruits, and you really don't. It's not a lifesaver as it has been billed by the banana industry.
You also get a pretty hefty dose of potassium in a serving of salmon, which is something that I found surprising when I discovered that.
Yeah, all kinds of other sources of things, and we've just been, you know, again, it's this reductionism. We think of one particular food because our brains can't really hold all that information. That's why it took me 6 years to write this book. You know, as soon as I'd forgotten some of the information in each chapter because there's so much to retain, and that's why I think we need modern tools to help us, and you know that's why we need apps and artificial intelligence and these things are going to help us through this complexity of nutrition. It's actually impossible to remember every nutrient in every food and have in your mind's eye what's good. But what I think this whole idea of personalization is, it allows you to rethink for you, you know, what your idea of a healthy or unhealthy food. And I still like bananas, so it doesn't mean I don't eat them, but I don't eat them every day. But I'm very happy to eat pears and apples and pears every day, which are just as good. And, often you get them more locally, so you don't have to fly them in, and it's better, for the environment, etc. So that's the banana story. And of course, it's a monoculture as well. And, they might all be wiped out by a deadly fungus, and we could end up with no bananas. So we might need a backup plan.
Yeah, we may. So what's the problem with like the occasional like blood sugar, quote unquote, spike? I mean, like, is blood sugar the key sort of indicator, like how it affects the glycemia, like how it affects our blood sugar, the key indicator of a food's like healthfulness?
No, but it's the one that we can now measure easily. So obviously medical science is often driven by what we can measure and what we can see. And this is in a way why we've got so much wrong with nutrition, is we didn't know about the microbes, so didn't discuss it. But we knew about calories 100 years ago, so we can measure that.
Right.
So that's why we've sort of been obsessed with that. So, but sugar certainly is important. There may be other things that we find that we can't measure at the moment that are as important. But a sugar spike in itself is normal. We're designed to have sugar spikes. That triggers the insulin, which brings it down. That's fine. And when we eat, we're supposed to get sugar into our blood system. That's completely normal. But if you're having these regular sugar spikes that are high and prolonged, that is associated with stress on the body, put stress on the insulin system. So you're more likely to, a few years down the line, get type 2 diabetes or some pre-diabetes, and it increases your inflammation levels. So you are stressing your system more than you need to. But if you just have a banana once a week, that's not really a problem. But if you were like me, having a banana every single day, that's an unnecessary stress that you could change just by switching out to another fruit that you like just as much. So it's not a yes-no thing. It's a matter of degree and what we take as our habits to think it's healthy. Just like an orange juice, I said, people have orange juice every day. That's that spike you don't really need to start the day, that over time, not immediately, but over time is going to cause damage to your body, stress. It's just working harder than it needs to all the time. Now, sugar isn't the only thing that we need to think about, and fats are the other problem for many people as well. So some people handle sugars well, and we should probably come back and discuss the PREDICT study about how we discovered all this. But if you eat fats at 6 hours after eating that fat, most people have cleared that fat from the body. The triglyceride, which is the easy one to measure, the main one we look at, it's generally started to go out. You've got rid of it. It's been transported back to the liver, out of the way. But some people, it hangs around. And so when they eat fat, it's just hanging around in their blood for much longer. And the more it hangs around, particularly in these small particles, it can get stuck in the system, and it irritates the vessels, causes another cause of inflammation. So you've got these two sources of inflammation, which have harm for the blood vessels, ultimately cause heart disease, but generally stressing that whole system. And we're all going to have some of this, but these modern foods are just, and snacking, and the way we're eating is designed, we're continually hitting us with these sort of aggressive insults. Yeah. So that, and then of course the third bit is how they affect the microbiome. But I think it's, at the moment we can measure blood sugar very easily with these amazing CGM devices, continuous glucose monitors. They've revolutionized a lot of the work we do. We couldn't be doing what we do with personalized nutrition without them, but they're only part of the story. So you can measure fats now very easily with a blood spot.
Oh, interesting.
And you can do it at home. And that's what we do with Zoe, as well as the blood sugar levels. We see how you respond to fats. And it's putting those things together, knowing whether you have a problem with carbs or with fats, which sort of person are you, allows you to worry more or less about eating a banana or overeating cheese or fatty meats. So some people can tolerate one and not the other, and it's knowing where you stand in these. But in general, that's where the problems lie, and they all come from our poor modern diet, which is really designed to keep peaking those things. And the food manufacturers have worked out that, the more those peak, the more you eat, the more money they make.
Of course. Yeah. I mean, I guess like what you can measure, you can manage and thus improve. And so if you have the privilege of being able to afford and wear one of those CGMs, you pop it in and you can, I guess, kind of see where foods send your blood sugar and then measure subsequently the sensations that you feel afterwards, whether it be hunger, anxiety. So super useful when given the appropriate context.
Yeah. What was interesting is we did this PREDICT study, which was how we first started we published about 3 years ago. We took 1,000 people, mainly twins, gave them all identical meals, and did all these blood tests on them. And there were like 10-fold differences between how everyone responded to the same food.
Wow.
These are normal people. These were not, people with diabetes or heart disease or anything. So these are just average population in the UK and the US.
10-fold difference.
Yes.
Wow.
And that was both in the sugar response and the fat response. Okay, so we even found that identical twins often had different responses to the same identical muffin. So some people had a good fat response. They dealt with that fat really well, but a really bad sugar one. Others, the opposite. So this is probably why people have, it's been so conflicting, the data on low-fat diets or low-carb diets, is because we're all much more different than we imagined. We think we're all the same. We think there's one perfect diet for everyone, keto is great for everyone, or, low fat is good for everyone. No.
Yeah.
And until you do these tests, we're all built very differently. And so that was a big revelation for us. But in that initial study, people didn't know what their blood sugars were doing. We blinded them to it. And it turned out that people, as well as these sugar spikes, get sugar dips. So 1 in 3 women, 1 in 4 men get these really pronounced sugar dips 3 hours after eating. So I don't know whether you get a dip in mid-afternoon after lunch, or, and people reporting with these dips, they really lost energy because they were recording on these apps their mood and hunger and everything. So they lost energy. They were feeling hungrier. The mood was down a bit, and they overate. So these are the things that they wouldn't have known if we hadn't subsequently sort of done these really careful studies with these CGMs that we're just discovering. So the same food can have a very different effect on different people is basically what we need to realize, and that we need to start thinking about how all the food affects us in much more detail. And some people are good at picking it up. But I, for example, didn't really notice when I was having these sugar dips. So
yeah.
But you could probably train yourself to be good at it but it's quite tough to do it without the gadgets.
And also, like, some people out there probably, may at certain times in the day want a blood sugar spike, right? I mean, like for athletes, bodybuilders, for example, that want that insulin spike to help drive amino acids into the muscle, halt muscle protein breakdown. Like, people have different goals too,
Oh yeah, no, I'm not, and I think the idea that you eliminate all sugar spikes is wrong. We just, but we're seeing that some people are sort of off the charts, and you just want to bring it down 50%.
Yeah, well, especially also like you zoom out statistically, and you realize that the vast majority of people have some degree of like glucose intolerance, metabolic dysfunction.
Yeah, but we mustn't get obsessed with just the sugar alone, because you can control your sugar spikes easily by just putting cream on everything, right?
Right.
You can put as much fat all over it, and that makes it look good, but actually you're doing just as much harm to your body.
Well,
so we have to take a more and it's probably that's not very good for your gut microbes either. So we do need to maintain this holistic view and not get obsessed with one particular bit of our diet.
Yeah, I mean, I've always kind of like wrestled with that because it's like you hear sometimes that like, yeah, there's a food with a high glycemic index, for example, when consumed in isolation, it'll send your blood sugar up, it'll spike your blood sugar, and then there's this advice to just add fat to it. But then, you know, I wonder if like the addition of all these additional fat calories, like if you're, you know, I don't know what the appropriate like phrase is, but it seems counterproductive. Like sometimes maybe it's better off like just eating the carbohydrates in isolation, you know, because if the alternative is you're going to add all these like additional fat calories onto it to prevent the blood sugar spike, so to speak, then like I feel like you're prioritizing the wrong thing.
Well, that's too reductionist. I mean, you know, that's taking like a laboratory method to, you know, designing your meal. Your meal's supposed to be fun, tasty, nice, appetizing.
I'll give you
so you've got to build it with lots of ingredients. You want to keep your gut microbes healthy. So you've got to have diversity. You can't just have, you know, I'm only going to have, you know, cream and, you know, the two unhealthy things mixed together. You can add fiber to it to suppress sugar spikes as well. So I was giving an extreme example. I'm not saying you should add cream to, you know, I was just using that as an example of what's wrong.
No, but yeah, some people do. Like an example that I can give is I know a lot of people will like enjoy starting their mornings with a fruit smoothie. And they'll put a whole bunch of fruit, but to mitigate the blood sugar spike, because you know so many people now have been conditioned to be afraid of these so-called spikes, they'll add coconut oil to the smoothie. And so I don't know if that's the right move to make or the wrong move to make, but it just seems like you're just adding a whole bunch of like additional fat calories that like you may or may not need.
Well, if you don't know how you respond to fats, that's potentially a problem because they may be hanging around your blood a long time, and if that's your regular way of eating over time, that's going to be bad for you. The point about the calorie density, I think is less of a problem because that's a more reductionist idea of coming back to this calories and macronutrients idea. There are good fats and bad fats, and I'm not a big fan of coconut oil, by the way. I don't think we should be, you know, it's great in your hair and
mainlining it.
It's great for your hair and in Thai curries, but no, I wouldn't personally eat lots of it. But some fats are good. Olive oil, for example, you can have pretty much unlimited amounts of olive oil, as they've shown in many big studies, and that's fine. So we mustn't stick everything together. But I think you're right to point out that you know, it's too simplistic to think it doesn't matter what the fat is. It's all about the quality of the ingredients. It's all about that holistic view. Are you getting the diversity? Are you getting the right balance? You know, how do I deal with fats anyway? Do I have a limit? Or some people don't have it. They can get rid of all that fat very easily. Others can't. So, but we do know that if you have fats and fiber, they do tend to fill you up better than certainly refined carbs. So despite those extra calories, they might make you less hungry. So again, none of the work we're doing is suggesting that calories are that important if you focus on the quality of the food, the diversity of the food. So in the Zoe program, once you've got your scores, you're given free range to mix up, put as much as you want on, but knowing that each of these has a different score and you want to try and get a good average score. And we don't mention calories at all. And with that, people aren't gaining weight. Most are losing some weight, despite having no limits on calories, not thinking about it. So sometimes what appears to be a more calorie dense option can actually be good because it might carry you longer without hunger pangs, and you're not feeling you have to have that mid-morning snack. You don't get that sugar dip, et cetera, et cetera. So it's trying to think more broadly than this rather narrow view of food that we've had before.
Yes. Which
is, okay, all cream, all fats are high calorie, therefore, they're no good.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Focusing too myopically on calories, I think, is a
complete disaster. And you only have to look, this country, you know, the obsession with calories, and everyone's getting fatter and fatter, despite everyone knowing about calories, despite all the menus having calorie counting, and no one, you know, the reason there's so many the diet industry is so big is that if it was so successful, there wouldn't be many, would there? But
you're right, 100%. Yeah, I think by placing the emphasis solely, as many do, on calories, it doesn't offer people any real practical, like behavior modification strategy.
Well, it does, because when they go to the store, they'll pick the low-calorie, pre-processed foods made by the food manufacturers that contain fake food. And so that's the strategy that they're driven towards.
Yeah.
And they're eating lots of these seemingly low-calorie, no added sugar foods that are making them hungrier and causing metabolic disturbances. Whereas if you just said, forget the calorie, think about the quality of the food and what it's doing to your body, that's really what, you know, we want to educate people about, is just a different way of thinking about food.
It also, it creates obsession for some. I mean, you know, some obviously out there have, it's like a tool, right? Like, and it's not a tool that's going to be viable for every person. And ultimately, I think people should institute healthy habits that don't have them needing to track things like calories and focusing instead primarily on food quality, so that you feel satiated and so that you're not going about your day hunger. Because those kinds of like diets, you know, when people just try to reduce their intake of the obesogenic food that they're already consuming, those don't last. I mean, it's like the Biggest Loser phenomena. You know, it's like people try to take, if you just try to picture like a plate full of the food that you normally would eat to fill yourself up, and what you've been eating to get you into this like obese state or even an overweight state, and you just try to like reduce your portion of that, I think that's where you're setting yourself up for failure, until you start to learn about like the satiety of different foods, the satiety-inducing effect. Yeah,
well, your body's designed, you know, by evolution, that if you reduce, you know, the amount of energy you're getting, it's going to reduce your output, your metabolism, and it's going to increase your hunger. And that's what all the studies show. All diets work for the first 6 weeks or so.
Right.
But by 2 years, the vast majority of people have gone back exactly where they were or overshot. And that's been shown time and time again, because the human body is not, you know, it's a much more complicated machine than we've given it credit for. And, you know, we need to start, you know, and in a way, when you start thinking about these appetite signals and all these drives for eating, rather than just assuming we're like a furnace and you just give it less calories, it'll be fine, you know?
Yeah.
No, your body knows exactly, you know, what it's getting, and it will act appropriately to fight it.
Oh, definitely. Your body doesn't want you to starve to death. That is certainly true. Talk to me about salt.
So these studies from the US, which have been using the American Heart Association guidelines for salt, which is about half a teaspoon of salt a day as your maximum amount, and looking at its effect on overweight individuals, those with diabetes, etc. And they found that, yes, it did reduce your blood pressure a bit, but it had no effect on reducing subsequent heart disease or strokes. And many of those people ended up with kidney problems or making their diabetes worse.
Wow.
So, you know, that got me to thinking that if salt restriction was actually, you know, too extreme was bad, what about the data? And so I started looking for something like myself, because I about 11 years ago had a weird episode up a mountain where I got double vision and had a little occlusion, a mini stroke at the back of the eye. And from that moment on, I instantly had high blood pressure.
Wow.
Which is very unusual, because it normally comes on very slowly, but I knew because I'd taken my blood pressure 2 weeks before, I knew it was normal. So I was looking at ways to reduce my blood pressure, and I tried salt reduction. And for me, it didn't work at all. And
wow.
Well, it did make me hate food because I found it really hard. And, one of the great pleasures in life is suddenly taken away from you. And of course, I wasn't eating lots of ultra-processed food anyway, which is where 70% of the salt is in these ultra-processed foods. And salt restriction for me didn't work. I didn't notice any difference in my blood pressure. I was taking it every day. And I looked at the literature and it said, on average, someone like myself, I was in my 50s, male, white, I would, gain 1 or 2 millimeters of blood pressure loss by going on an extreme salt restriction diet. And that benefit was so small that I said it really isn't worth doing this. Particularly, there might be some other metabolic consequences. And from that point, I've said that I'm not saying salt has no effect, but it does seem to be variable between people. So there's quite a lot of evidence that Black African Americans are more salt sensitive, and they do get greater benefits from salt restriction than Europeans. And there are differences between groups, and there's individual variation. But on average, the amount of benefit the population would get from a salt reduction is pretty minor and hasn't really been proved. And to extend that point, the studies where they've swapped salt for potassium, and there are these things called low salt where you have potassium chloride instead of sodium chloride, and you increase the potassium levels, has 3 times the benefit of salt reduction.
Wow.
So, and the other interesting thing is that you get most of your potassium, as we've discussed with bananas, from a whole variety of plants. So people who eat plants have high potassium levels, and they also have lower blood pressure. So suddenly I was looking at this literature saying, there are these campaign groups against salt, and a lot of cardiologists are really very obsessional about, I never have salt, and I've never, and every chef you've ever spoken to said, well, food without salt, it's not worth eating.
Exactly.
You might as well cut off your arms. It's like to say, well, this is a ghastly way to live. And so for me, it was, I was on my own journey saying, great, I can have salt again. But clearly I'm not someone who lives on ultra-processed food, which is packed with salt. So yes, they should be reducing it. But just by increasing our plants or swapping chemically your salt for potassium, you can get a much bigger salt reduction. So it's massively hyped. And I think it's one of the, again, it's this reductionism that we see, that the only thing wrong with bad food is there's too much salt, too much fat, too much sugar. That's sort of true, but it's not the main problem. The main problem is the quality of food, and it's all this ultra-processed stuff. And they're using salt to cover up the lack of taste or the lack of texture in those foods. And yes, there's a lot of hidden salt in breakfast cereals and cookies and things given to children, which absolutely don't need to be there. But for someone who's on a reasonably good diet, absolutely no need to salt restrict for most people. And we should probably test individuals before consigning millions of people to a lifetime of misery.
Yeah.
Which is pretty unsustainable anyway. I think most cardiologists have a hard job getting anyone to adhere to a low salt diet, because it's absolutely essential for humans. It's the one thing humans want.
Nothing tastes good without salt. I mean, vegetables, some of our healthiest produce, it just becomes unpalatable without salt. And same with meat, same with animal products.
I spent some time with the Hadza tribe in Tanzania, these hunter-gatherers in East Africa. It was supposed to be most like our ancestors. And the one thing they wanted to trade more than anything else was salt.
Wow.
So, they hated eating their meat without salt.
Wow.
And so that was, well, if these guys, prepared to walk, sort of 20 miles to the nearest sort of place to go and get a bag of salt.
Yeah, I mean, I eat a pretty high sodium diet. I mean, I minimize my consumption of ultra processed foods, but I eat canned foods on occasion. I mean, when I'm eating vegetables or steak, I salt my food as I'm cooking it, but then I also throw on these like big Maldon flakes, like these big salt flakes, because I love the texture. And then I additionally I drink like element like electrolytes frequently. Like this beverage that I'm drinking had 1,000 milligrams of sodium in it, and every time I check my blood pressure, it's like pristine. It's perfect.
Yeah, well, I think as long as you realize that some people are sensitive, but most people aren't.
Right.
But don't treat everyone the same. It comes back to the same idea. There isn't one rule for everybody.
Yeah.
We are all rather different. And that I think it's a really nice message that you can have salt as long as you're having even more vegetables and more potassium.
Well, it sounds like from what you've said, it's only the minority of salt that we ingest every day that comes from our salt shakers.
Oh, yeah. It's really tiny compared to what you get from processed foods. Yes, I mean, if you eat out a lot or you get lots of takeaways, then you're going to get a lot of salt in your diet. So that's the only other caveat. You can be getting a lot of hidden salt, and in large amounts. Yeah, it should be avoided. And you're realizing that if there's a lot of salt in the food, generally they're trying to hide something. That's they don't want you to taste.
Did you see what the number one? There was a new study that came out. The number one source of dietary sodium for Americans is, do you know what it is?
No.
It's pizza. It used to be for decades, it was bread and rolls. So this is not what you typically think of as being high sodium foods, right? Bread and rolls. You think canned foods, cured meats.
No, supermarket bread has quite a lot of salt in it.
Yeah. But now it's pizza is the number one, followed by bread and rolls.
And probably followed by breakfast cereals.
Yeah.
It's frightening.
It's wild. Walk me through a day in the life of Dr. Tim Spector. Like, what do you eat? Like, how do you break your fast? What's your first meal of the day? What's your last meal of the day? I want to know.
It sort of depends where I am. But increasingly I've, say I'm working at home because, I would usually not eat before 11 in the morning. In Europe, we tend to eat rather late, so my evening meal probably finish at about 9 o'clock. So that gives me my 14 hours, and I'd have a full-fat yogurt mixed with kefir, which is fermented milk, and mixture of berries, frozen berries, and nuts and seeds. So I have a jar full of various nuts and seeds, which is about 8 or 10 different varieties in there. So that gets me off to a good start in the morning, and have lots of black coffee. So at least a double espresso to start the day.
So coffee's good for us.
Yeah, and I have that before. I reckon, having talked to Sachin Panda as well, that black coffee is okay. It doesn't break your fast. So I think that's really important, because people often want something, whether it's black tea or black coffee in the morning. Yeah, when they first get up, and I'm like that as well. So that's generally what I do. Sometimes I am working hard and will just skip the breakfast completely and just have a slightly earlier lunch, and just take out whatever's in the fridge, throw together a salad, or I've usually got sauerkraut and kimchi in there, and I'm a big cheese fan. So particularly raw milk cheeses. So I'm getting lots of fermented foods in my diet.
Is it easy to get raw dairy in the UK?
Oh yeah.
Interesting.
It's all, and lots of, there's actually more varieties of cheese in the UK now than there are in France.
Wow.
Lots of artisan dairies now.
It's illegal in the US.
It's crazy. Absolutely crazy.
Why is that?
Why? Because they're obsessed with hygiene, and there were occasional outbreaks of listeria in cheeses, and so after the war they banned it and just haven't changed the rules. And some of it might be protectionism also now to stop it. So there's a rule about if cheese isn't more than 3 months old, it can't be imported into the US. You can get dry cheeses like cheddars and things like this, but you can't get all the really tasty raw milk cheeses that that everywhere. It's all over Europe now that everyone's eating. There's a few places you can get raw milk cheeses. I think in California, I've had some.
Yeah, you can get it.
It's quite hard.
It's hard, and you can't get it across state lines,
No.
is what I understand.
But yeah, so for people who haven't tasted it, do go and find some. It's an amazing taste experience, and it's also a super healthy food. And you're getting all kinds of extra microbes in there. And just those blue cheeses, Roquefort, that people don't know, but the blue line in the Roquefort is they inject a fungus into that cheese, and it grows nicely there. And it's fun. So when you have a cheese, even the rind and in the cheese itself, you're getting about 5 or 6 live microbes, plenty of probiotics as a healthy way. So it's eating dairy but in a fermented form. So it's yes, you're getting the fats, but you're also getting the benefits of the live microbe, as opposed to the sterile cheeses you get on pizza, which are completely dead or artificial, often fake mozzarella's and other things that are all too common in the US because of the mass market. So do try those. So yeah, big fan of those. There's plenty. Kimchi's now hit London, and is probably the number one. I make my own as well, so I do a fair bit of fermenting at home.
Love it.
So I make my own kombucha, kimchi.
Wow.
And I sometimes recycle my kefir. You can, if you've got to buy a store kefir and you run out, you just put it into a pint of milk and you'll have more kefir the next day. It's all kinds of little tricks like this that people don't know about. So as we rediscover fermented foods and how good they are for us. And then my evening meal would be mainly plant-based foods. I actually get a box delivery with vegetarian recipes, and they're all organic, and you get exactly the ingredients you want and you make it. Because when I converted from being a sort of predominant meat eater 10 years ago to predominantly plant-based, I still have occasional meat, but I didn't really know how to cook vegetarian food. So that's often a very good way to start off and get ideas. And so that's generally what I do, usually with a glass of wine, red wine, because that's the only type of alcohol that's been shown to be good for your microbes. And try not to overdo it.
Yeah. It's got all those polyphenols in it.
Yeah, that's right. So it's the fermenting process increases the number of polyphenols. So that's why you get more polyphenols in it than grape juice. And you don't actually need the alcohol. It's not very good for your gut microbes, but it's the alcohol that produces all these extra chemicals.
Interesting.
And so we did a big study in London with our twins and showed that those drinking red wine had healthier guts than those drinking either beer, spirits, or even white wine.
It's very trendy now. People are quitting alcohol. And I think we're starting to see headlines come out overturning this idea that I think many people believed for the past few decades, that alcohol in moderation is actually beneficial to your health. But I feel like there's been a number of studies that have come out really challenging that idea with stronger science. And you see a lot of people now on social media, whether it's dry January or just giving up alcohol altogether.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's true everywhere. And people are drinking less alcohol, and it's a generational thing as well. When I went to medical school, it was absolutely compulsory. So
I'm sure.
You weren't allowed not to drink lots of alcohol. But the young generation, are drinking much less and being more sensible. And there's no doubt that alcohol is harmful. I'm not trying to say it's beneficial, but if you are going to have a drink, one glass of red wine is what I would say is the least harmful and may give your gut microbes some benefit. So don't feel too guilty about having artisan cider is another one that if it's made with real apples, again, you've got the polyphenols in there, is another one that's to watch out for. But you're right, there is no safe limit of alcohol. But when I looked at the evidence, drinking 1 unit a day, the risk is trivial compared to driving your car for 5 miles in LA. It's trivial, and I think you've got to put these risks into some context. And that's, as an epidemiologist, I'm able to do that, but most public don't. They just get told, "Oh, it's risky to doing that." But no, you have to drink. I think I worked out how many bottles that I have to drink in my lifetime before I had an event due to just drinking one glass, and it's tiny. So everything's a question. We're all taking risks every day. Some of them we think more or less about, but alcohol generally it does serve some purposes, though. I mean, for social reasons. It could be that the reason the Mediterranean countries live much longer than Americans and are healthier is that they do have, the idea of all of them having alcohol in small amounts over long periods of time. So they go out and meet, and the old folk are going to have a glass of beer or a drink together. And that social network is actually more important than any harmful effect of the alcohol.
Beer is like liquid bread, is it not? It's like loaded with purines. Like we had Richard Johnson on, who's like an expert in uric acid metabolism, and he was basically like saying, I think he actually will drink the occasional beer, but he was pretty not in favor of drinking beer regularly.
I don't have any strong views on beer. I mean, there's no evidence that it's a health drink. Although the Belgians claim it is, because they claim that if it's made artisanally and you've got some of the yeasts in there that's still there, they could be having some benefit on your gut. I've yet to prove it to me conclusively, but it could be that, like anything, ultra processed beers made on a vast scale are very different to artisanal small breweries where you know exactly what's gone into it, and you've got the pure fermenting process. But
it sounds like that's the case with pretty much everything, doesn't it?
I think it is, and it's also knowing what's in what you're eating or drinking, and I think that's why one of my goals is really to educate people about what we're putting into our mouths.
Well,
more than we've known before. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you do a great job. 30 plants a week. It's going to be my new mantra. Should get that put on a t-shirt or something. 30 plants a week. Focus on food quality.
Fermented foods. Yeah. Eat the rainbow.
Rainbow.
And no snacking.
No snacking. And so tell me about Zoe. So how comprehensive is the testing that you guys do?
Well, I think it's the most comprehensive of the personalized nutrition kits out there, because we measure the blood glucose, with a CGM, we look at the post-meal fat levels with the skin prick test, and we fully sequence the gut microbiome.
Wow.
So you get all that.
Stool, blood, like you take everything pretty much.
Yeah, and you put all your personal health details into the app, and you get your results back so that you get your sugar score, your fat score, and your gut microbiome score individually, and then we combine them so that every food you want to eat is then given a score, and those can be put together so that you can compile a meal, and that whole meal is then given a score out of 100.
Wow, interesting.
And the idea is that people go through this, they learn their scores, they pick their foods and menus, and they try and get an average score of, say, 60 or 70%. And if they do that, then we know that they're not going to have excessive spikes, they're not going to have fat levels that are hanging around, and their gut microbes are going to be improving in health. And so the idea, this is a sustainable program for life, and without once mentioning the C word. Okay, so the idea is this is
C word being calories, of course.
Yes. And we find we've just done a randomized controlled trial, but anecdotally, which I'm sure the results are we're going to be announced soon, but they're definitely going to back up the anecdotal evidence that people definitely feel more energy. People are writing to me saying, the most surprising thing I found about this was once I started eating this way, I suddenly had much more energy. I was less hungry, and my mood improved. And these are things they're going to stick with, and because they're suddenly thinking about food in a different way, how to get that diversity, how to, steer away from some of these refined foods they didn't, as we talked about early on, they thought were healthy or not. Getting the quality fats rather than just any, worrying about all fats as the same, just educating people on how to eat. And a lot of people found this really easy. And the whole point is we wanted this to carry on for years. It's not a diet plan. It's not a 6-week, get ready for the beach idea. And long term, yes, some people are losing weight, but it's not the main outcome. The idea is to really get people metabolically better from the inside out rather than outside in, and it's been a fantastic success. So it's really taken off. We've been focusing on the UK, and we've got huge waiting lists and thousands of people doing it. And we're accumulating these massive databases of these microbes. So we now have the biggest microbiome database in the world. Wow. And we're able to make all these new discoveries about, for example, we found there's a particular microbe associated with coffee drinking. So we can instantly tell if you're a coffee drinker or a tea drinker.
Interesting.
Just by this one microbe.
Wow.
Just loves coffee. This guy, it's called Lawsonobacter, and could be the key about why coffee's healthy for you and why it reduces heart disease. We're finding all sorts of insights from these microbes that we're going to feed back to people and can tell them their gut health, and we're going to start retesting people again, and so they can see how their gut microbes have improved just by this change in not sort of nothing to do with calories, just switching them towards a healthier gut friendly diet, and this will enable people to carry on for years on these plans. So it's going super well, and I think it's really part of the future, and it's going to keep evolving because as we get more data, everyone signs up in these studies to be part of a scientific citizen science experiment. So they all donate their data back to the database. We write publications on it with all the top scientists around the world. Here in Stanford, others. Mass General, London, etc. And each time we make a discovery, like the sugar dips, we put it back into the product. So we tell people, actually, you're a sugar dipper or you're not a sugar dipper. We've got some new data on the menopause, showing that women, as they go through the menopause, are actually much more susceptible to sugar spikes. And what they were able to eat a couple of years before is very different. And no one's ever shown this before. So we're getting so much, and as this database is sort of doubling every few months, we're just going to have this massive resource that enables us to sort of dissect personalization and all these subgroups and give people increasingly better advice as it goes on. It's just going to keep evolving as we get better and better.
It's definitely the future. I mean, and the future is now, but I feel like precision nutrition is something that, it's only very recently where we can really start talking about start making personalized recommendations for people.
Well, we just didn't have the tools before. Yeah. It's the technology that's advanced so much.
And like nutrition intervention trials, they elucidate averages, but when you present an average, right, like say coffee, right, like the population seems to really love coffee. On average, people seem to be doing really well with more coffee, right? There seems to be like a dose response, but underneath that curve, like there are people that are doing really bad with, from their coffee habit, that their coffee habit isn't necessarily serving them. And there are people that are like really thriving.
Oh yeah. I think this should be the end of the average.
Yeah. The end of the average.
We should just say, but it's a bit like a colleague of mine, Christopher Gardner did this study, the Diet Fit study, where I think there was a big number, 600 Californians randomized to high fat or high carb diets, both healthy, supplemented with plants and things. And over a year, both lost weight. No difference between them. So, you know, the keto guys are unhappy, the plant guys are unhappy, you know. But when he looked at the data, you know, there were people that in each group that had sort of gained 10 kilos or lost 15 kilos. And if you knew in advance, you know, you deal well with fats or you deal well with carbs, you know, you'd have had a brilliant curve.
Yeah.
Which have been double that effect. And that's really what we're trying to do. So yeah, nobody's average. That's what our studies have absolutely shown. Everyone has a completely unique gut microbiome. There's no two people alike. Even identical twins only share 25% of their gut microbes. You know, it's the only thing I've seen in my 30 years of studying twins that is so different.
Wow.
And that's got to tell you something. You know, these are genetic clones who've lived 18 years of their life together, eating every meal together.
Wow.
And they're still different. And that just explains so much about human individuality, about why we respond to foods differently, why we respond to medicines differently, why, you know, you take Tylenol and it works in some people and not in others, why antidepressants work in some people, not in others. It's, you know, suddenly everything's chemical and food is no different to medicines. And so embracing this and realizing that, yeah, we've now suddenly in the age where we've got AI, we've got these mega computers, we've got these incredible phones with apps, all these gadgets, wearables. You know, I'm sure the new watches are going to have sugar monitors in them in 5 years. You know, we need to embrace this and just really be smart and use this to combat, you know, the food industry and all the advertising that's telling us to eat the wrong stuff.
All those damn primary colors. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Well, this was super fun. Thanks for coming out. Hey, if you liked that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.
All the breakfast stuff that has been marketed as like good for you, you need sugar in the morning to have energy, actually it's just a one-way ticket to a glucose roller coaster and feeling like crap.